Information fueled.
Opinion driven.
This is Nashville's Morning News with Dan Mandis.
And so, my fellow Americans,
we talk news.
8:06, Nashville's Morning News on Super Talk 99.7 WTN. Good morning to you, friends. Welcome on into a Monday, March 10th. Hope you're doing well. A special 30 minutes here on this hour of Nashville's Morning News. You know Tim Lepper as our roofing extraordinaire. He is a guy who has been advertising on WTN for some 17 years. But that's only part of what Tim Lepper stands for. Tim is now screaming from the mountaintops, asking for accountability for Tennessee's private prisons after his son passed away in one. So I want to talk about this because Tim, you and I had coffee on Saturday, and you've got an incredible story. Now I'm just going to tell you, I'm not a fan of private prisons, so your story really had an impact on me. So talk a little bit about the journey of your son.
Thank you, Dan. My son, Kylan, was a good kid. You know, we did a lot of normal stuff growing up, grew up in church, coaches ball teams, went on vacation, did cool stuff, had one younger brother, almost 3 years to the day, Colton. They were best friends. And, over time, Kylan began to exhibit trouble in school. And then at some point later in life, even with the intervention of his mother and I, he still landed in the corrections crossfire, if you will. And so that was where we always hoped that it wouldn't go.
And so ultimately he ended up in, because, when you go to, you end up in the correctional system, you kind of bounce around. And he ended up in one of these prisons run by CoreCivic. And he was a young adult, and he was very health conscious. He was eating protein out of the commissary, because you can't really eat healthy in the, as you say, the slop that they have in the CoreCivic prisons, and very health conscious. And then suddenly you get a phone call that he is overdosed on fentanyl and he's died. And what happened? So
we spent some time and effort and money and private investigators to find out what truly happened. And we did get the autopsy report back that it was a fentanyl overdose death, but it was a pill form. So it wasn't anything that you would take illicitly. You wouldn't, shoot it or, snort it or anything like that. It was a pill form. And so he took that, which was very confusing to us, because as parents, every day of our lives when we talked to him was spent planning for the future. He had a young son that was born while he was incarcerated, and that son, who also shares his name, Kylan, now doesn't have a dad, and it was just a head scratcher. And so it was not only incredibly debilitating to try to, pick yourself up and move on and plan a funeral, but also now we have this other person that we have to care for. And so what we found out from our investigation was that the drugs were being brought in by the staff, and that's a problem for me.
Well, it should be a problem for everyone. And there was, just so folks know, talk real quick about the difference between a Tennessee-run prison and a private prison.
Sure. Tennessee-run prison, TDOC facilities, there are 10 in the state of Tennessee, and they're managed and operated by TDOC employees. To work there, you have to go through a 6 weeks correction academy, which is down, I believe, in Tullahoma. And it's taught by, drill instructors. It's taught by people who know what they're doing. And for CoreCivic, there's a series of classes that you need to take to be hired. And so the difference between the private and the public prison is, some years ago we had an incarceration issue and we needed population control. And so private prisons came on the scene in Tennessee with CCA, now CoreCivic, rebranded, and they began to take bed space for the state of Tennessee, and they would charge per inmate per day. And what we have found over the years is a private prison has a for-profit model. Yeah. And so the more they can save, and the less they spend on services, the more profitable they are. I know that last year, I want to say one of the most recent years, they were about $1.9 billion industry with $188 million in net profit, while the state TDOC facilities are much safer. You have a way less chance of being killed in a state facility versus a private facility.
Well, when you have a for-profit model, then cutting down on guards, cutting down on security, you have fewer guards per inmate than in a state-run facility. And as a matter of fact, there was a Department of Justice, I think it's still going on, the Department of Justice had actually opened an investigation into CoreCivic's Trousdale County Prison. So, and what they're finding is what you're describing, not good. And part of this has to be, what are prisons for? Are they to try to rehabilitate people, or are they here to punish folks? And I'm of the opinion that they should be here to rehabilitate folks, to make sure that when they get out, they have a path. And is it your contention that these CoreCivic run private prisons, for-profit prisons, don't do that?
Well, they really don't have the funds and the resources to do that, because they funnel it all towards profit margin, and they funnel it all towards their shareholders. There's no college courses. From the statistical analysis that Commissioner Strada put forth last year, I didn't see any college courses that they had at any of the 4 CoreCivic locations here in Tennessee. So there's not a lot of rehabilitative opportunities there. What I have found and what I sense is that if somebody goes in for a 10-year sentence, I would like for them to take that time, have an intake process where you go in and we figure out why we're here, right? So do a full psychological evaluation. Then from that evaluation, we develop a plan. The plan basically is going to say, for the time that you're here, we're going to work on impulse control. We're going to work on behavioral management, cognitive behavioral therapy. We're going to work on substance abuse issues. We're going to create programs to give you the best chance of being successful, so that we return a better version of you than we took in an intake process. And if those things would happen, there's generational changes that could come from this. Think about this. Think about the inmate that's been incarcerated 3 or 4 times, served 10, 15 years of his life in prison, and yet all of a sudden, the last time he went in, he has opportunities to make changes to his life. He gets out, and now his nephews begin to see, his children begin to see, his mother begins to see, and all of a sudden they're asking, what happened? What is different with him? And there's a purpose for rehabilitation. We just need to tap into it.
Tim Lepper joining us on Super Talk 99.7 WTN. Yes, his name sounds familiar. He advertises on the station, but you're here to talk about something far deeper, and you want to make a change because of what happened to your son, Kylan. And I think that this is a serious conversation that needs to take place, because for-profit prisons, from what I can tell from the Department of Justice, is saying in their investigation into these prisons here in Tennessee, is that they're not good for anyone. They're not good for the prisoners. If you want to rehabilitate these folks, it is just not happening. As a matter of fact, people are dying in these prisons far more in the private prisons than in the Tennessee-run prisons, right?
That's correct. Last year in Trousdale alone, there were 28 deaths, and that's according to Commissioner Strada's report that he puts out every year. So there are 28 deaths. That's over 2 a month. To me, I don't know why red flags aren't going up everywhere we look. Now compare that to the maximum security facility at Riverbend, where we house death row inmates. They had 1 fatality last year. That's insane. That's incredible that we allow this level of carnage, and from somebody who's a subcontractor and supposed to be under our authority, under the TDOC. We control that contract, and we can pull back. And I hear a lot about fines. Well, fines aren't working. Fines are built into their contract, their business model. And so if I have a contract for $244 million, as CoreCivic does with the state of Tennessee, and I can get $234 million, Well, in my mind, that's better than no $1 million. And so we just cook it into the recipe here. And if we get, $234 million, it's a good year.
8:16, Nashville's Morning News on WTN. So you're working with some state lawmakers to try and effect some change. We're going to talk about that straight ahead. Let me ask you, Tim, why is it? Because, I mean, you are like, shoulder deep in all of this now because of what you're trying to do, working with the state legislature to bring some accountability for these private prisons. We're going to get into that. But as you speak to all of these lawmakers, why do we use these private prisons? Why don't we just have all of our prisons run by the state of Tennessee, where prisoners are much more likely, it seems, to, number one, be able to survive, and number two, be rehabilitated versus just being punished?
Well, they preface it with population control, prison population management. At this point, there was a time that probably was important, but I look at a problem from an entrepreneurial perspective, from a business perspective. And obviously, government and business work on two different realms, right? And so if I see a problem in my business, I go in and I fix it. If I see somebody is not getting the communication they need, I go and talk to my production manager, and I said, from here moving forward, we call these people 2 days before we start a job. We talk about all the things that need to come up, and then we don't hand that off to anybody. You handle it personally. That's how I handle things, and the problem gets solved. And so I'm very results oriented. In this case, there probably was a time that we needed the bed space. We didn't have enough prison space if we're going to continue to incarcerate at the level that we are in this state. So if we don't have the bed space, there was a time that we needed them. But at this point, there's a possibility that we could divest out of private prisons. And I know that maybe people, may think that that's too high a hurdle to clear. But guess what? Lease the facility back from Core Civic. What do you think they're going to do? Tear it down?
Yeah. So what is it you want to do with this legislation? You're working with Senator Mark Pody, State Senator Mark Pody, and the name escapes me who you're working with in the House.
Clark Boyd. So what is it that you're asking them to do as far as this legislation? What do you want? So the bill came out originally, and it was going to lower the designation from a medium security to a low security prison. And that allows us to pull off some of the violent inmates that are in there and only leave low classification inmates and bring in low classification inmates from other places, so that if we don't have the same issues, maybe we will have a better result with the death toll. And the goal would be that after a 1-year wraparound that we go back and have an accountability measure in there where we say, okay, if the death rate is not down to a equal level to a TDOC size facility, then, we put you on a shorter probationary period, in which case, we, could at this point take the prison back over. I don't know if that's going to pass in committee, if it's not going to pass in the subcommittee. But what I do know is it's a problem that we need to be talking about, because if this had happened in a local county jail, and for example, in 2024, from January to November, there's allegedly 16 overdose tests in one facility. That's insane.
How is it getting in?
It's getting in from the staff. I know that because I have eyewitnesses and I have people who are ready and willing to testify to that.
That's horrifying. I mean, these are people that are being paid for, well, if it's Core Civic, who pays them? If it's a Core Civic employee, then they're getting paid through the arrangement with the state, right? So,
from what I understand, Core Civic just pays their employees, just like a subcontract agreement.
Yes,
I would pay my crew, but I would get paid from the company, which is the state of Tennessee.
All right. So coming up, I want to talk about the roadblocks that you're finding and what has surprised you about this journey that you've been on over the last, how many years has it been?
He passed in October of 23, so
okay, just
under 17 months.
So 17 months. It's heartbreaking and incredible journey that you've been on. We're going to talk a little bit more with Tim Lepper. 827, Nashville's Morning News on Super Talk 99.7 WTN. Good morning to your friends. Welcome on in. Tim Lepper is joining us. You know him as